Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back, everyone. Today I get to talk about somebody I really admire and love as a historical figure. And I get to do it with one of my favorite scholars, Dr. Creese. So Dr. Creese, welcome back. Today we're talking about George Washington. So can you talk to us about the role that George Washington plays at the Constitutional Convention?
Thank you, Liz. Another great question you've posed. Of course, Washington is famous in a certain way, not as famous and well-loved now, 250 years after the founding as he was at the time and for much of the 19th century. But he does still have the title of the founding father for those of us who pay attention to him and admire him. But this is a role, his important role at the Constitutional Convention itself in Philadelphia in summer 1787, that we don't pay much attention to, even those of us who are fond of George Washington and admire him. And there are good reasons for that. James Madison is given the sort of honorary title, the father of the Constitution. He's absolutely crucial at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. His notes, published long later, because the deliberations were secret, it was a rule of secrecy, give us the most full account of what happened at the Constitutional Convention. So all praise to James Madison, and he deserves the title of father of the Constitution. And then, of course, there are other delegates we know from not just Madison's notes, but other notes who spoke a lot and played crucial roles, even if they weren't in the open debates. They performed crucial committee roles, Gouverneur Morris and James Wilson and Roger Sherman, et cetera. So we tend to overlook this because in the notes, Washington doesn't say a lot. So give me a moment here to explain why, and I'm going to cite a scholar from Yale University, Akil Amar, constitutional law professor, who makes the argument Washington is as important as Madison for producing the 1787 Constitution. And Akil Amar wrote this Constitution, not Madison. I think that goes a little too far. So my way of phrasing it is James Madison is the father of the Constitution. George Washington is the father of our constitutionalism, because Washington was thinking about the need for a new constitution. And we know explicitly from his writings, at least from 1783, once the war for independence is won, once he can step down and retire. So in a way, Washington's first farewell address is his circular letter to the state governors. This is a phrase that was used. Same letter sent to all the 13 state governors. His final one in 1783. And in that letter, it's a kind of farewell. He's going to resign his commission, which is a hugely momentous thing. He's not going to become a Cromwell, the advocate of Republican liberty in England, who then becomes Lord Dictator, right? He's not going to become a Julius Caesar. Later, we would think he's not going to become a Napoleon, right? Just after Washington's lifetime. He's going to resign as the victorious general. He's going to resign from public affairs and not threaten liberty. He's just fought a revolution for liberty. So this is a big deal in 1783. But he says, I owe it to you, the governors and your state legislatures, to give you some parting advice. And the main theme is we need a real constitution. The Articles of Confederation is too weak. We don't really have a government in the center. And he's basically saying we nearly lost this war for independence because we had no real government in the middle. They couldn't tax, they couldn't coordinate and regulate, they couldn't organize public support, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that's the beginning of the constitutional reform movement. that leads to the 1787 Constitution. Then there's a crucial role he plays in the middle. These two young guys, one named James Madison, the other named Alexander Hamilton, are in the Confederation Congress. There's only one body under the Articles of Confederation. It's just a single body Congress. And there's no president, there are no courts, there's no executive, et cetera, et cetera. These two young guys, Madison and Hamilton, are really frustrated. They get to know each other. They and others start to propose meetings among different states to think about, gee, we need to coordinate our tax policy and our commerce and other things. This is just crazy. We're at each other's throats, let alone disorganization regarding foreign affairs, right? So there's a meeting in Annapolis, the Annapolis Convention, Annapolis, Maryland, in 1785. Well, lo and behold, Washington not only plays a role in bringing about, even though he's in Virginia, because it's a meeting between Maryland and Virginia delegates, okay? He not only knows it's happening, helps to bring it about. The meeting begins at Annapolis and ends at a place called Mount Vernon. You may have heard of it. That Annapolis Convention ends at Mount Vernon. Washington giving his personal, in-person seal of approval. We need constitutional reform. Then there's another meeting that happens in 1786, and it's at that meeting in 1786 of different states that there's the call made for a constitutional convention to meet in Philadelphia in 1787 to amend, think about amending, revising the Articles of Confederation. So Washington is playing a role kind of publicly, kind of behind the scenes to bring about the 1787 convention. Okay, and then just a couple of crucial things. The fact that Washington shows up, he agrees to be a delegate from Virginia to this meeting to discuss revising the Articles, is a huge boost to the credibility and legitimacy of this. Okay. Then on the very first day of official business, Benjamin Franklin, through another delegate who reads his address, nominates Washington as the president. These are the two most famous people on the continent. And the fact that Franklin says Washington should be president, that puts aside any kind of dispute between the two. And it means the most credible, somewhat younger political figure, George Washington, is now presiding over this Constitutional Convention. Okay, and then a third thing. I'll mention this later about the particular relationship between Washington and Madison. So just a general thing about the Constitutional Convention itself, a crucial thing about Washington being there. The state of Rhode Island had used the rules of the game under the Articles of Confederation to block any reforms of the Articles of Confederation, because under the rules of the game in the Articles, it took unanimous consent of all 13 states to revise the Articles. And tiny little Rhode Island kept saying, nah, boo, we're taking the ball and going home. We don't agree with any of this, right? So the credibility of the convention is at stake because Rhode Island refuses to send anybody. So now what's the point? You're going to meet and talk and propose articles, so revisions to the articles, but Rhode Island's already saying we won't, we're not playing along. We're not involved. It seems to undermine it. So some scholars refer to the 1787 Constitutional Convention as a constitutional revolution. Legal, public, no guns. But what they end up doing by the end of the summer, right, from May to September, they argue for 4 months. They come up with a constitution. Rhode Island is still not there. And they have the guts to say, Washington sends the final transmission of the Constitution to the Articles Congress. These amendments? No. This completely new Constitution should be sent forward by the Articles Congress to all the states, even though Rhode Island was never even there. So the credibility of Washington presiding, finally at the end of the 4 months, sending it out to Congress was crucial to deal with any of these questions that, hey, this is all legal. This is not following the rules for amending the articles. So, and then I'll just say two more things. He was there every day. He was there from day one to day final after nearly 4 months, right? Mm-hmm. And he made sure, therefore, other people were there. You're not going to, when George Washington says show up to work, you're not going to show up. Who are you? You little moron, right? It's just the message he sent by being there, and he kept them there at work and kept the process moving forward. And secondly, a rule of secrecy. There was one day when someone left some draft documents around, and the cleaning staff or anybody could have picked them up, and
Mhm.
and he comes up the next day and says, "These documents were left. This violates our rule of secrecy. I assume whoever left these documents will come collect them at the end of the day." No one ever came to collect those documents, but no documents were ever left again in the session, right? So the rule and the rule of secrecy was crucial because we know this from life and from committee
Mhm.
meetings. And if you can talk discreetly to somebody else, you can test out something, you can say something that maybe really needs to be said, but it's dangerous for you to say it, or you might look bad, or someone might not understand. So they had these really very full, candid debates for 4 months because of this rule of secrecy. And this is the crucial background role that George Washington was playing.
I am like, and we'll probably never know, but I want to know who left those papers
That's
because
right.
they were sitting there going, I am not. So you brought up James Madison,
Yeah.
and James Madison's role in shaping the Constitution is huge. So both Washington and Madison were delegates from Virginia in 1787 at the Constitution or the convention in Philadelphia. Did their relationship kind of shape the work of the overall convention and again that final product which ends up being the Constitution?
Yes, and there are a few scholars who are great on this. In fact, much of what I'm saying is drawn from one scholar in particular, Richard Brookhiser, wonderful biography of Washington called Founding Father. And the subtitle is Rediscovering George Washington. So, but he's not the only scholar who notices this. That, again, this is kind of background role. Washington stays in the background here. Once he agrees to be a delegate, this is March of 1787, he writes to James Madison, his younger friend.
Mhm.
And the letter is extraordinary. And I'll just summarize it by saying, "Dear Mr. Madison, I'm going to this convention. It better do something, not just be a sit around talk shop. We need, I'm summarizing here, we need a new constitution. This will take some thought. Hint, hint, you, Madison, are a scholar, in fact. I'm just General Washington. I never went to college. I read a lot. I have a lot of books. I spend money on books. I'm not dumb, but you are a scholar. You know the kind of thinking and work that needs to be done to write a whole new constitution." And he says in the letter, "This will take radical cures." That's a quote, right? He basically is giving Madison permission to come up with the Virginia plan, to write a whole new, don't think about just amending, revising, write a whole new document. This is George Washington, the most famous guy, the most credible guy on the whole political scene, right? And now we know privately that Madison was already thinking this way. He's ordering books,
Mhm.
he's writing to Thomas Jefferson, right? But this is like the big guy who has all the credibility says to me, the less known guy, "Go for it, Jimmy. Go for it." That's the seed of the Virginia plan. And then Washington is very supportive of elements of the Virginia plan. Now, there's a way in which Washington could have gone too far with his influence. So one reason we don't pay attention to Washington at the Constitutional Convention is, as I mentioned, I think I may have mentioned in the notes, he doesn't say a lot.
Mhm.
And that might suggest he's not really important. And or these are big brains, Madison and Gouverneur Morris and James Wilson and Roger Sherman and Luther Martin and Alexander Hamilton and blah, blah, and Washington is not a scholar like this. No, no, no. He's like there every day. He's in the taverns at night, at dinner, talking about all these points. And he believes in the principles of the Virginia plan: separation of powers, a single executive, a single person elected as under the title president, holding a
Mhm.
4-year term and not democratically elected. I mean, this is extraordinary. And there's no way it would have happened unless Washington was alive and standing and sitting there in the room as a model of a powerful executive who you could trust, who wouldn't become a Caesar or a Cromwell or a Napoleon. So it's a tricky relationship, but Washington plays this crucial role. It's by staying behind the scenes and by not abusing his power that he has more influence right? Because he's already resigned from very strong executive powers in 1983, that he has such influence. That gives credibility to this plan for a much stronger government in the center with an executive, with a long term and a lot of power, commander in chief of military forces. So the relationship between the two of them has this paradoxical role. Very few of them know that Washington has played this role to push Madison forward. And then by Washington not saying too much, it helps the argument that Madison is trying to make.
So are you suggesting then, because again, like you said, there's not a lot of Washington in the discussions because he just doesn't do it. We should be paying attention to what he allowed or encouraged other framers to do, but also making sure we pay attention to what he himself did not do in order to see how important he was in bringing about this convention, but also our Constitution.
Yes. So again, when the Virginia plan is put forward, there's a single person as a president with these extraordinary domestic and foreign powers. It immediately on the floor of the convention is referred to as the fetus of monarchy. We just had a revolution against monarchy. What are we doing? But because Washington is there, but not dominating, not overbearing, it shows them, okay, yeah, right. We are very lucky to have Washington. He could be the first president, but there might even be others. Now we're going to structure the relationship between the branches and structure the presidency, Article 2, so that when you don't have a Washington, it'll still work, right? But his quiet, neutral presiding role gives a boost of confidence to this idea. And then there's one more crucial episode, and Brookhiser makes a lot of it, and I think he does rightly so. The very last day. So you have to imagine it's Philadelphia, it's 1787, it's the summer, it's hot, it's muggy. All the air conditioning machines are down. They're having a terrible time. But they're there day after day. And then it's nearing the 4-month point. It's September. They're getting tired. They want to go home. But they're close, right? So Washington, on the final day, they've got a draft that they've been working on. It's refined. He steps up and says, I propose an amendment. And it's an amendment that we would think of as small d democratic, to make the House of Representatives in the legislative branch larger. Right. So the electoral districts would be smaller, fewer people in the districts means you have more districts, right? To make it more democratic, more representative. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but that resolution had been put forward like 3 times in the preceding 3 weeks and had been voted down each time. Here he is on the last day bringing up again and why? So the first thing he says is, I have not spoken on points of substance during this convention because I thought it was my role as the presiding officer to not be seen as kind of a player, right? But this is important. And then why is it important? Because he wants as many delegates present to be able to vote for the Constitution. And he can see across the weeks, this is a real sore point, right? This is too aristocratic a Constitution. It's got the Senate and the single executive and the judges and the judiciary, they're not elected, right? So the concern was we need a little more democratic, small d democratic ballast in that House of Representatives. It was a sore point.
Because at this time, the Senate was chosen by state legislatures,
yes.
Right?
So Washington listening to this dissenting minority view and saying to the whole body, can you give these guys a break? Can we compromise on this point so we get more people to vote for it? And he makes this statement. He sits down. There's no discussion. There's a vote. It passes unanimously. Now, you could say, well, look, it's the final day. They still don't have air conditioning. They're tired. They're exhausted. Get out of there. But the background, 3 times in 3 weeks, they debated this. 3 times it gets voted down. Now, so Brookhiser says, okay, yes, it's the end of the convention. They're tired. But also, what's he standing for? Minority viewpoint, consensus, compromise. And it shows that if he'd wanted to use his authority more frequently, he could have, and he didn't. And again, it's this whole crucial background character role that he's playing in getting the convention going, getting the Virginia plan going, keeping them working, not being overbearing, being a good model, and then trying to speak for the spirit of compromise. So there's more to talk about with George Washington, his extraordinary farewell address. But I will say this, when he dies in 1799, a member of Congress gives a eulogy before many members of Congress in 1799. And this phrase from the eulogy that's widely remembered: Washington was first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. And we forget in the first in peace part, father of our constitutionalism, that he uses his extraordinary power, ambition, prestige, credibility to bring about a constitutional order that can fulfill the principles of the Declaration.
Dr. Harris, thank you for shedding I feel like a new light for our listeners on leadership, especially during our founding and especially with Washington. We appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.